Hello again. I want to talk today about multicultural education, which most of you probably know it means trying to work in the perspectives of minority groups in society to show their history, their cultures, religions, and so on in the education provided for everybody. That's easy enough to do if you're teaching, say, religion or philosophy. You can work in Buddhism, you can work in Islam alongside Christianity, assuming we're talking here about America and Britain. The problem sometimes comes when we think of history and we try and teach history in a multicultural way, and then we run into serious difficulties. For various historical reasons, people of African origin have contributed little or nothing to the art, culture, philosophy and science of Europe and North America during the 18th and 19th centuries. Now we can deplore this, we can wring our hands about it, and we can agonise over the racism that was responsible for the omission of an African contribution to our civilization. But the fact remains that black people did hardly anything at all of note in those centuries. Okay, that's a fact, and there's nothing at all really to be done about it. Well, I'm being a little unjust now to left-wing educationalists, because one thing you can do about it is rewrite history, and you can try and shoehorn in black people and pretend that they were important scientists or authors just as good as anybody else. If you're bold enough in such an endeavour, you should be able to persuade the rising generation that your own made-up version of history is the definitive one. It's the one that they will take away with them when they leave school. And soon it will occupy the internet and obliterate the truth, which we sometimes do see in the internet. I wonder who recalls the party slogan from George Orwell's 1984: who controls the past controls the present. And this is exactly what's happened. The past is now largely under the control of people who view history not as an objective struggle to overcome difficulties to uncover the truth, but rather as an ideological battle to control the hearts and minds of young people. You think this is an exaggeration, perhaps? I want to give you one or two examples today. Part of my work, I don't need to go too deeply into this, involves visiting secondary schools in East London, where children aged between 11 and 18 are taught. In a classroom recently, I saw a display around the walls, and it was of great literary figures. It was designed to inspire the children. This is quite extraordinary for three chief reasons. In the first place, all the other famous authors up on the wall, Mark Twain, Flaubert, Jane Austen and so on, have written novels, plays and poetry of great literary worth. They are literary figures. For that reason alone, Solomon Northup doesn't really belong there. He's associated only with an autographical work, the book called 12 Years a Slave. It doesn't fit in with all the novels and fiction and other things that these people are famous for producing. The second reason is that there's no particular literary worth at all to 12 Years a Slave. It's not brilliantly written and no one pretends it does. It's a novelty, but it's absolutely atrocious and very heavy going to read. Finally, of course, Solomon Northup didn't actually write the book. That was done by a white man called David Wilson. So for all these reasons, putting Solomon Northup in between Mark Twain and Charlotte Bronte was a little bit odd. Well, I say a little bit odd, it's exceedingly odd. Why was it done? The answer is that some governors of the school came by and noticed that all the wall displays had pictures of white people on them. This is a school in a very multicultural area of East London, so a large number of the pupils there are black. The situation then turned into this. The governors insisted that some more black people were put up on the walls to increase the self-esteem of black pupils. I don't like to be cynical, but about half the pupils have great difficulty stringing a sentence together or using correct punctuation or beginning sentences with capital letters. Still, there we are. Cultural sensitivity trumps literacy and education generally any day of the week. Hence the insertion of a man who never wrote anything more complicated than a shopping list alongside some of the great authors in the English language. This same process of revising history had been going on in the science department, but I couldn't take a photograph there. There were too many people about. I don't really want to make myself too unpopular by mocking what's being done in some schools. Anyway, this time there was a wall display with pictures of various black people, and supposedly they were amazing black scientists and inventors. Nobody had ever heard of any of them, and they were designed to show the African contribution to science. One in particular caught my eye. It was this man. Under his picture was the absolutely astonishing and quite untrue statement that he was a mathematician and astronomer, and that he had made the first clock in America in 1760. They actually said he'd invented the first clock in America in 1760. You wonder what people were doing to keep the time until then, but still, never mind. I knew then, as soon as I saw it, that this is a complete lie. I've got a bit of an interest in horology, timepieces and so on. And I know very well that in the 17th century, clocks were being manufactured in America. I know that they were manufactured in the 17th century and through the 18th century. And it's quite an interesting story. Anyway, I came home and Googled Benjamin Banneker and discovered to my amazement that the internet is actually full of his story. If you try Googling first clock made in America, Benjamin Banneker's name comes up all over the first page. Straight away, Benjamin Banneker is the man that made the first clock in America. It's so bizarre that I suspect that some viewers will be persuaded that I must be wrong about this. If every hit on Google says that this black man made the first clock in America, surely there must be something in it. Well, there's not. The clock which Benjamin Banneker was supposed to have made wasn't mentioned until 30 years after his death. A book published in 1836 made a passing reference to it. If it were made, it was supposedly constructed of wood. Benjamin Banneker apparently carved the cogwheels himself, which isn't as odd as it might sound. During the 1600s, there was a bit of a scarcity of metal in parts of America, and making clocks completely from wood was not uncommon. A man called Benjamin Cheney was producing clocks like that for sale in the 1740s when Banneker was just a child. Just to put the matter beyond all doubt, here's a photograph of a clock which was produced around 1740, certainly earlier than 1745, made in Boston by a man called Benjamin Bagnall. Here's a clock made entirely in America years before Banneker allegedly made his first clock, or invented his clock as it was put. What we're seeing here is two instances, Solomon Northup and Benjamin Banneker. It's one instance, it's one aspect of multicultural education, which essentially consists of the colonization of British and American history by various insignificant people, whose only claim to fame is their African heritage. We see it a lot. I'm sure that some viewers will have encountered this before if their children are at school or if they attended school themselves in the 1990s, say. It means that any semi-literate person is fit to be ranked alongside Mark Twain and to appear next to him, even if he can barely read and write, as long as he's black. So also the history of early clockmaking in America is a complicated and fascinating subject. Various people made contributions. It's an interesting story from 1600 to the mid 18th century, but it's a complicated subject. It's so much easier and more exciting if we simply say that nothing happened until a black man invented the clock in America in the middle of the 18th century. It's much more satisfying for black children, at least, to be taught that this is what happened. I'll be saying a lot more about multicultural education in another video which I intend to make soon. But for now, I just want people to reflect a little on 2 examples that I've given and to ask themselves whether or not this is history and history of literature and science, or whether it's something else entirely.